Hello.
Hey Sarah,
Can you hear me clearly?
I hear you great. How do I sound to you?
Super clear.
Oh, good.
It's nice to be appreciated.
Whoops. Hang on. Siri hears you also. Close her up.
I mean, Siri's correct. It is nice to be
That's
appreciated. So,
oh, Sarah. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
no, go ahead.
I was going to ask you where you are. Where on this planet are you?
I am in Cambridge, Massachusetts.
Lovely.
And
Okay.
are you in Evanston or in Chicago or?
A little bit north in Highland Park.
Very nice.
Yeah.
So as people are trickling in, I just want to start, and I've said this to you in Instagram DMs, but thank you so much for doing this. I have so long admired your work, and I have followed your podcast, and I am familiar with the center, I guess, or clinic that you work in, know that of its great reputation, and have read your books, and so the ability to talk to you right now is such an honor. So thank you so much for doing this.
You're welcome. Thank you so much. It's I appreciated the invitation, and I am happy to connect with you and get to know a bit more about you and celebrate the work that you're up to as well.
So I guess just to jump in, and so to give you some background information on this book club and who might be tuning in or might be seeing this later on, because it's not everyone can join live. So I started this book club um, about a year ago now. I was finishing up my clinical internship and had just accepted my first job as a psychologist post internship, and was going from working in a safety net hospital, which is that a term that you're familiar with? It, I don't know if they use it in the Midwest. Um, to working at a larger hospital in which I wouldn't be working with the same populations that I was working with, and really just wanted to find a way to reach and help people who might not have as many accesses, or like resources, I should say, to mental health, and might not be as familiar. And so started this Instagram first with kind of a blanket offer to help anyone around the country find therapists, to talk to anyone for free about what they're looking for in a therapist and what they might need, and see how I can help connect them to resources and help them navigate the system. And it became pretty evident most immediately that a lot of people want therapy, want more resources, but didn't know where to start. And so books and podcasts were a good way for people to dip their toes
Mm-hmm.
into the world of mental health resources without taking that step to talk to a therapist and commit to weekly therapy or whatnot. And so that launched this book club, where every month we have been reading books mostly by psychologists and therapists, but some by people who have attended therapy. Or we had Gretchen Rubin, who wrote the Happiness Project. So it's not all mental health professionals, but
Right.
On different topics. And one thing that I love so much about your work is that it is so inclusive. And I know you make a point to say that early on, that so much of society today, and I don't want to limit it to the mental health field, but so much research has just been done on heterosexual, cisgender, white couples. And I so appreciate the inclusivity that you incorporate into this book and into the work, and the willingness that you have to call out the gaps that exist
Mm-hmm.
in the literature today, and to address those. And I know that a lot of the people who sent in questions were so appreciative. I mean, I got just as many people saying, like, thank you for introducing me to this book, or thank you for choosing a book that made me feel heard or understood as someone who doesn't fit into a neat category, whether that be in sexual orientation or race or religion, or wherever they're at in their sexual journey. And so I want to jump into the questions because there were so many of them. But before I get started, just want to ask you if there's, anything that you think is important for people to know about you and how you got into this specific field within psychology before we jump into the questions.
Yeah. Well, as you were kind of framing up our conversation and where you live in this matrix and what you've been up to in terms of helping people interface with mental health, it was making me think about, what a truly exciting time it is to be doing this work. You are entering this field. And so for you, entering this field with social media, with all of these access points available to us, you're going to kind of hit the ground running and just sort of build your career and your identity with this kind of work, these kinds of conversations woven right in. And it's so striking. I'm definitely older, but I'm not like a little dinosaur. And it's so radically different certainly I grew up in a home with a mom who was a huge self-help enthusiast. So she had stacks of books, all over the house. There's, The Road Less Traveled and Jonathan Livingston Seagull and all of these kind of spiritual self-help psychology books. She's an educator, but has kind of always been, a curious gal. And so the world, like the realm of self-help books isn't new. And of course, Oprah and that whole like first wave of talk shows where we were sort of opening the doors and looking at mental health. None of that is new, but it continues to be that, even in the early days of my career, it very much was like the world of therapy was over there. And if you went to therapy, you probably didn't talk, about it. And so when I was trained as a therapist and as I began my work, there still was quite a bit of stigma around mental health and very much a sense of like, that's for those people. And I have made working with the media and interfacing with the public as a relationship educator, as a sexuality educator, it's always been part of the work that I've done. So whenever Northwestern, would get an inbound request, I'd be like, I'll do it. Like, I'll talk to the journalist. I'll go on that TV show. Because I loved, well, just the kind of challenge of how do you package a message and, speak really clearly and get a message across. But I also love this idea of like bridging what I knew was incredible. Like I knew from the first moment, just as you knew from your first moment, how powerful it is to be in the room with an individual, to be guiding somebody through a therapeutic process. It's sacred work. When I sit with couples, this morning, I've been doing this for 20 plus years. And this morning I was tearful with a couple. Like it's so sacred, the work that we are privileged to be able to do. And so it's a really exciting time. Anyways, I'm giving you a long answer to it being an exciting time that there's just so much more flow between the clinical world and the social media world. I love how much people turn to Instagram for, just daily micro doses of support. And I know that all of us who are clinicians are super clear. This isn't therapy. I cannot talk to you. I cannot give you specific medical or psychological advice. And at the very same time, I can give you this little nugget, that just you can carry with you. It's like a pebble, on your path. So it's a really exciting time. I think it's a challenging time for us as clinicians because we have to figure out how to stay in our own integrity, how to like breathe and take breaks and step away. But I love that for those who still, where either therapy remains either not quite accessible or not quite, they're just not ready, or they're ready, but their partner's not ready. A podcast like Reimagining Love or books like the books that I have written, those can be supports that help a couple have a different kind of conversation, which is ultimately what couples therapy is about, is helping people have different kinds of conversations, different experiences of each other.
And I've said it in all of the book club emails, but if anyone has not listened to Reimagining Love, you should subscribe to the podcast right now. It is phenomenal. I'm a huge psychology nerd despite being a psychologist, and I'm always consuming psychology related podcasts. And it's one of my favorite podcasts to listen to while I run because you're so wise, and I recommend that anyone subscribe and listen to it. And I think and the questions that were submitted really speak to this, that I got an equal number of questions from people who are married and in committed relationships as people who are single and navigate the dating world. And I think that that's something that both your podcast and your books really bring as a strength, that it doesn't cater to just one specific person within the dating or relationship world. And I think that that's really important to realize that I think people know theoretically that, even if you're in a long-term relationship, you're still dating the person and there's still work to be done. That that such a strength that you bring in your work is that it pertains to everyone along the spectrum.
Yeah. I often find that people discover my work after a breakup or after a divorce. And sometimes there's a kind of regret or anxiety of, I wish I knew then what I know now. And I really want people to be tender with that part of themselves, because we don't. When it comes to sex, my gosh, so few of us have received the sex education, like the holistic, wholehearted sex education that we need. And so few of us have received the relationship education that we need and deserve. And so often it's baptism by fire, right? We learn in our first relationship or two or three, or we learn in our first marriage. And so often it is like, years ago, Oprah said, the universe sends you a brick, and if you don't listen to the brick upside your head and, kind of do your healing, then you're going to get the whole brick wall crashing down on you. And so lots of people are introduced to my work, into the work of relational self-awareness, in that moment when the whole brick wall comes crashing down. And that's okay. I'm continuing to fight for a world where everyone starts this work when they're 16, 17, 18, and they get to kind of come into their first relationship with it. But it doesn't, life's messy and it doesn't always work that way.
Yep. Are you okay if we just jump into questions?
Please, yes, let's go. Let's do it. Yep.
Okay, and I'm trying to balance choosing ones that pertain to people all along the relationship spectrum.
Yeah.
The first one, and I got a lot of questions about the golden equation of love. So the first one says, I read the section about the golden equation of love at the perfect time for what I was going through.
Aww.
But it's so much easier said than done. Aside from being in therapy or talking to people, how can I integrate the equation into my thinking when I'm down on myself from a dating interaction?
That's great. Yeah. So backing up a moment for anybody who's here where this is the first time they've heard that term, the golden equation of love is basically a way that I'm encouraging us to be thinking systemically, like thinking about relationship dynamics, everything that happens, in all of our relationships. We're talking tonight about intimate relationships, everything that happens from the first date to, year 25 of a marriage, it's a dynamic. It's my stuff plus your stuff equals our stuff. It's a choreography. It's the pattern. It's the back and forth. We are so finely attuned to each other. We watch, I'll be sitting with a couple and they will go from calm to triggered so quickly, and quicker than I sometimes will even see. But it's because, she knows that when her wife's eyebrow goes up like this, like shit's about to hit the fan, and she knows it better than I'm ever going to know it. And so we are keying off of each other. And so it's my stuff plus your stuff equals our stuff really is a way. And when couples have a conflict, for example, I really like this practice that my colleague at Northwestern, Dr. Eli Finkel, tested, which is that it's this powerful practice where you step away, you get into conflict with your partner, you step away, and you both write about the conflict from the perspective of a neutral third party who thinks very highly of both of you. And that literally like you're writing in the third person. And that practice really is a nice entry into the golden equation. My stuff plus your stuff equals our stuff. Because from that third party perspective, you can see, partner A felt hurt that partner B, got home an hour late. And then partner B felt defensive that partner A didn't, even ask, why are you late? And so that kind of back and forth helps you really understand not just what each person experienced, but then taking it a step further about why is it a tender spot? What is it about my own and my partner's past? Very often the past long before you even knew about each other, right? Childhood wounds, early relational experiences that creates that particular sensitivity. And oftentimes in a relationship, we don't have the same sensitivity. So it's like we have to make this mental mindset shift of seeing that my partner is different from me. Yes, that wouldn't have bothered me, but it bothered them. But what our question asker is asking is about the golden equation of love in dating. And so sometimes that can be tricky because if I'm just dating you, I don't really know. I don't have your genogram. I don't know the family system that you came from. I don't know your prior dating history. All I know is that I cracked a particular joke, you know, over a beer and you just like shut down. I don't really know what happened. So I think some of it, I think the golden equation of love, you know, has to be practiced, of course, in a kind of circumspect sort of way when we're just getting to know somebody. I mean, I think the lovely thing about deepening into connections, we can start to ask questions like, I noticed you just went quiet. You know, what was going on for you? How am I coming across to you right now? I think we can get really curious as we're getting to know somebody about those back and forths. But what I like about it is when we have imperfect information and all we know is that that person shut down or they ghosted us, we can remind ourselves, okay, there's more to the story than I know. And there's more to the story than I very likely will ever know. But it's not that I have been rejected as me, for me, 100% about me. There's something that happened in the interaction. And if they weren't able to say, hey, it really bummed me out when you know, whatever, took a phone call during our date, they're not going to let me know that, then I can't get curious about it. I can't work with it. I can't apologize, pivot, try again. But just that, even just remembering like, okay, there's more than meets the eye. There's a part of the story that is their part of the story that they are responsible for, can kind of keep us from some of those shame spirals that some of us are prone to.
And I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, part of, you know, in an ideal world, we would know what my stuff and what your stuff both entail. But that, you know, given what you said, that often in dating context, we might not know the your stuff, that's also where the self-compassion is so important to come in. It's so easy to blame ourselves when we're seeking answers for what may have happened, right? Because as human beings, we want answers, we want explanations, and we can't always have those in situations in which people are ghosted. And that having that self-compassion and realizing there is a your stuff to the equation, even if that is really key in these situations. Is that accurate?
Absolutely. Yes, absolutely. And I think, you know, the other way around too, right? Like, especially, you know, dating is a massive process of data collection. You know, like if there's something that happens where I've gotten the same feedback, you know, 3, 4, 5 times, can I be curious and humble enough to know that it's not just your stuff? Like there may be a piece of it that I'm bringing in, you know? And so yes, but self-compassion, I think especially, you know, I think there's so much risk of, you know, putting all of it on our own shoulder. And, you know, the people who come to these kinds of IG lives, who follow you, who relish your book club, I think they're the people who are a bit more at risk of going into the what did I do wrong mindset.
Totally. The next question was, I still think about the sex that I had with a former partner despite being in a committed relationship. Is this more, I feel guilty even though I imagine from your book that you would say I shouldn't?
That's a beautiful question, right? It's well, it is a challenging problem. I can imagine that this challenge, like thinking about the sex that you had with an ex, even though you are with this person, I imagine that it kind of evokes a sense of guilt, perhaps some shame, perhaps some fear. And I love the idea of just kind of just being with it, like just kind of getting curious about why it's happening. I think so often when we have, especially when we have a train of thought that is an erotic train of thought, that is a fantasy-based train of thought where it's charged like that, I think some of us, if we've grown up, especially in kind of a shame-loaded culture, we're so used to shutting down all of our sexual thoughts or all of our erotic thoughts, or getting into this like very good, bad, right, wrong sort of mindset with our thoughts. And so I could imagine a world where this person just like shuts it down and says, nope, that's wrong, that's terrible, I'm a bad person, I have to just focus on my partner. I would instead want them to just be curious. And as this person is saying, in taking Sexy Back, I really invite people to be just deeply curious about their fantasy life, because again, it's data and we don't know what it means. And I think it certainly makes sense that it is far easier to idealize the sex we had with an ex than it is to idealize the sex that we're having with the person right in front of us. Because the sex we're having with the person right in front of us, it's real, it's raw, it's messy, it's complicated, there's desire discrepancies, there's challenges, da 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 da. But the sex we had back then in that context, it's very easy to idealize that. And so part of it, it may be that there are actual real live differences between sex with that person and sex with this person. That's certainly one hypothesis. Another hypothesis is that there's an ability to idealize it because it's distal, it's a memory, it's not real right now, having to be negotiated and dealt with. That's one thought I have. Another thought I have is, could this person get a bit clearer on what it was about that sex? And the way I'd want them to get clear is, who was I in those sexual experiences with my ex? Who did I get to be? What part of me was coming forward? Was there a way that it was a bit easier for me to ask for something, receive something, express something with that partner than with this partner? And if you can get a bit of clarity about an actual difference, like, are these memories hanging around because there actually was a difference? Can you really keep the self-inquiry around, who was I back then? What part of me came forward? Because then it might be that there are some tweaks that you can make with this partner to bring some more of you forward in that way, to ask a bit differently, to play a bit differently, to express a bit differently, versus what I think so many of us would be at risk of doing is saying, how is my ex different from my current partner? And kind of like line it up and like, and I think that's less interesting than something where it's like, who was I back then? Who am I now? Is there some part of me that needs to come back through and show up a bit more today?
Yep. No, I think that's a great point. And I guess on a related note about past and current relationships, someone else wrote in, I loved your section on trauma and how that filters into relationships and sexual intimacy. I've had some triggers pop up somewhat recently that weren't as strong at the beginning of my relationship with my husband. As a result, I don't think my husband knows what to do or what has changed. I miss sex, but I feel like I've been scared for so long that trying to initiate anything now feels overwhelming.
Okay. Good. This is a really...
There's no question, but I think that it's probably something that would resonate with a lot of people. And any thoughts about, I know you talk about how to bring your partner into the conversation and let them know what the triggers are and what you need, but any advice on someone who has triggers pop up now that might not have been happening?
Yeah. Well, it's the first thing I would want to do is just really validate that even though the trauma was in the past, it sounds like for this person, some of the triggers have shifted. And one hypothesis would be that as this person kind of deepens into safety and intimacy and closeness and trust with her husband, I'm just thinking of the she, with her husband, that that there's potentially some new layers. So in some ways it may be that with, in a paradoxical way, as she feels even more safe with her husband, it's like another layer kind of gets peeled back. And this is one of the tricky things about trauma. It's not, I think we can do beautiful healing work that needs to get revisited. I think all of our healing is like a spiral staircase. We can circle back through, but we don't ever circle back through the exact same way. I think we circle back through with a bit more grace and a bit more ease, and a bit more finesse. And so that would be, I would want her to keep a really hopeful frame around it, that yes, some stuff is coming up for me now. It may be because we are so close, my guard is down a bit more. And it may be that I would want her to return, if there had been some trauma work that had been helpful, could she return for a little bit of a tune-up, whether that was EMDR or some somatic therapy or some talk therapy. And I really would, it may be that, I hope that her husband can be what I call an intimate ally, somebody that she could turn to and talk with about it. And it's not in a punitive way, like when you do this thing, it creates a flashback. That's not punitive. It's the two of us, shoulder to shoulder, looking together at my triggers. And if the two of us are looking at my triggers, then what we get to do is we get to build this entire script around that, right? We get to work with it because we know where we don't want to go, but that leaves all these possible avenues of where we could go, you know, like, and it may be that some tweaks, whether that's having some music on, having a bit more lighting, a bit less lighting, something about the context, like if there's contextual cues. I love this idea of the two of them kind of working together to create a really solid foundation of safety from which they get to kind of play. And the beautiful thing about a marriage is you're not really time limited. Like, you can try it. If it doesn't go so well, you pause, you give a big hug, and you say, we'll come back to it in a few days. Like, this is the lovely thing about, you know, about ongoing relationships, is that no one intimate experience is the end all be all. And you get to kind of have your erotic playground be like this living laboratory, you know, where there's a bit of stretch and then returning to safety. And so those would be some of the hopes that I would have for her within her marriage, that, you know, even a beautiful marriage, even a beautiful marriage can't be the sum total of trauma work, but certainly intimate partnership can be a huge asset and boost to somebody who is, you know, doing their work in other realms as well.
Yeah.
And Sarah, just whenever you want to chime in on these too, like, my gosh,
well,
bring in what you want.
I was just going to say, you know, and trauma has come up in many of our discussions, I think probably because it's so prevalent and so powerful. And I think, you know, and we already talked about guilt with another question today, that trauma is by nature often induces a lot of guilt and shame, even when the person was not at fault at all. And, you know, want to say, either for the person or anyone who this pertains to, because I'm sure that this person is not the only experience sexual trauma and having come up in relationships, is that you should not feel guilty in telling your partner what you need. And you should not, you know, it's overwhelming, and I want to validate that, right?
Yeah.
Easy, but I think often we want our partners to know what we want or what we need, and we think that we're being a nuisance in telling them. But that, you know, and I think especially when there are triggers, it makes the other person feel like they can better be there to know what exactly they can do. You know, that it's that it's not guesswork, because often when they have to guess, they might fear doing something to further the trigger even more.
Yep. And it may be, you know, if and when they are ready, doing some couples therapy, you know, with a clinician, with a trauma-informed clinician, or some sex therapy, you know, with somebody who is trauma-informed as well, which is, again, you know, any kind of therapeutic resource that we reach for, we don't reach for it because we're broken. We reach for it because we deserve, right? From a place of deservingness. Like, these two people deserve to have their sexual connection with each other be something that is celebratory, comforting, exploratory, you know, where there's lots of possibilities. And, you know, trauma creates a constriction of possibilities for very, very, very good reasons. And resourcing themselves, or even just like, I think about, you know, we were saying before about all the resources that are available. One of my dear friends, Dr. Holly Richmond, wrote this book, Reclaiming Pleasure. It's a beautiful book. I could imagine she and her husband both reading that book. I love the pleasure mechanics. They've got a wonderful podcast and wonderful courses online, because some of it, you know, is also about like education, because even something when we're engaging in sexual education, it makes it easier to talk, to use the words, to like kind of have back and forth. Because I imagine the more these two can talk about sex and touch, it makes it then easier to kind of then the conversation about where are the limits, what's within bounds, what's out of bounds, how will you let me know? All of that becomes easier as there's just modeling, and the, you know, different writers and podcast hosts just normalize the conversation around sex in a way that just brings everyone's guard down and makes it feel so much less intimidating and threatening and tender to talk about.
And one thing too, you know, and it's so interesting because people, every day I'm getting multiple messages from people for, you know, asking for help finding therapists. And one thing that people often ask is, you know, how do I know, for example, and this is something that does come up often, if I want a trauma-informed couples therapist or sex therapist, or if I need to be an individual trauma therapy, you know, doing EMDR. And also in couples therapy? How would you help, like, how would you advise people navigate? And it's, obviously so personal, according to the couple, but are there any tips that you could give people in knowing, when to merge the therapy into one course of therapy versus when to both be in the couples therapy and addressing the trauma individually?
Yeah. I think the overarching theme is you dig where the ground is soft. Like you just kind of start somewhere. Um, if two people are willing, I really, really like the idea of couples therapy. There is research that suggests that couples therapy, even as a standalone treatment, can help with individual diagnoses, depression diagnoses, anxiety diagnoses. So couples work is helpful in alleviating the symptoms of individual mental health disorders, which makes sense because our relationships are so powerful. They're such an essential part of, who we are as people. But there are plenty of times where, if I'm the first point of entry, a couple's coming to me for couples work, and if what we're finding is there's too much, there's a ton of escalation, there's a lot of individual stuff that's coming forward within the context of couples work, then I'm in a really, really good position to refer, one or both partners to individual therapy. And then I end up sort of quarterbacking the treatment team, right? So I'm in collaboration with partner A's therapist. I'm in collaboration with partner B's therapist if both of the partners have given permission for that to happen. So like, I think it's pretty dreamy when we've got that kind of a situation, which I know takes a lot of time and a lot of resources. And it may not be a forever. There are times when we'll do some couples therapy, we'll pause it, they'll go off and do individual therapy, and then we'll kind of pick up again. So it can be sequential. So I think I'm answering the question. I think that if what somebody is saying is, I have significant trauma that I have never addressed, then I understand the benefit of starting with individually based trauma-focused therapy, which doesn't necessarily have to be EMDR. It could just be really lovely, deep work.
Right. Right. Another question that I loved was, how can I explore my sexual orientation within a heterosexual marriage? I've always been with men, except for some drunk fun making out with girls on random occasions. Lately, I've been starting to question if it was because I was drunk or maybe I'm actually more bisexual than I previously considered. I have no desire to cheat on my husband, but it feels weird to come out as bisexual while having no plans to be with anyone besides my husband.
Well, I think certainly I would want this person to just give themselves permission to identify however, to put words to themselves and to their soul in whatever way serves and suits them. And it may be that even if they never say it to anybody besides their journal or their husband or their very dear friends, that I identify in my soul as bisexual, I think there's a way that even that labeling, that using that word, putting the word bisexuality to the self descriptor can be a kind of like healing and honoring, even if it doesn't ever end up looking any particular way behaviorally. So if that, I guess want her to play with, like, sort of where might I want and need that word to go, and does just the process of beginning to identify myself in that way, even if it's only very private and quiet, does that create a bit more ease inside of me? Because I think the risk is it can get panicky, like, oh my gosh, I'm now married and I'm married to a man and I love this man and our life is working and we're sexually monogamous, but I'm thinking back to these makeups I had and they were maybe it was more than that. Like, I think that train of thought can get panicky and tight and kind of constrictive. And there can be a kind of urgency there. So I would wonder if just as a first step would be, what if I breathe into, I actually think that the label, the description of myself as bisexual feels more authentic to me. If that could create a bit of ease and just kind of reduce some panic or urgency. And then a next step may be that if she wants to remain sexually monogamous with this man that she loves, could the two of them even just conversationally talk a bit more about attractions to women? They're watching a movie together and she gets to express, her attraction about that woman. Like, could there be ways that they play with that language. And that, so again, that part of her is, you know, feels seen and validated, and that it comes with her, you know, on
Yeah.
her journeys. And then of course, you know, there may be a need a need now or at some point to have a deeper conversation about a kind of opening up. I hear that she's crystal clear. What she does not want is non-consensual, non-monogamy, but there may be a way or a point where she wants to open a conversation with her husband about some consensual, ethical, agreed upon non-monogamy that gives her a chance to kind of explore this in a more lived sort of a way. But the first thing I want her to know is that she's got a lot of permission to play with lots of possibilities, you know?
Yeah. And I think so often people feel like they need some kind of justification, whether that be for coming out with a certain identity or for dating a certain person or making any kind of, decision. And, at least from my perspective, you don't need any justification for why you're coming out when you are, or why you're making a sexual decision when you are, that, I think people, and again, said that done, should feel free to express themselves how and when they want to, even if there's no reason, right? So there doesn't have to be some kind of action that follows
Yeah.
the coming out process, that it can just be, this is something that I've been holding on to and I want to explore what that means, or I want to explore what it feels like even to say this to someone.
Right.
And that's a justification in and of itself. There doesn't have to be some larger action that follows.
I love that. I think that you have said that really beautifully. I think that anybody who identifies as bisexual, or I think it's not uncommon for somebody who identifies as bisexual to feel like there needs to be a story after that, right? Nobody who's straight ever feels like they have to tell a story that supports or justifies or rationalizes or contextualizes their identity as straight. And I think probably I would venture to say that even somebody who identifies as gay may not feel quite like that. But people who are bisexual feel like there needs to be like a ... after it. And I would really want her to free herself from that she gets to just be as she is, how as she is. I could imagine her living a really rich life as a bisexual woman who is married to this magnificent man, and that is the story of her life. And she's far from alone in that. And and that's, as you're saying, that there's not, right, she doesn't need to justify it to herself or anybody else. Mm-hmm.
Perhaps what the most people wrote in about was this differentiation between being driven by fear and driven by love.
Mm.
And I think, and you so clearly address it, that it's not always super clear cut which one it is, and involves a lot of introspection, because I think that, as members of society, we can become prone to try to convince ourselves that we're doing this because we want to and not because of the fear, and that it really can be powerful to analyze, is this really what I want to do? Someone wrote in, reading your book, I realized that I engage in hookup culture in order to feel more confident in who I am. Knowing people I think are attracted to me. But maybe this isn't a healthy way to engage in these behaviors. Do you have any advice on how to garner this confidence without going home with random men every weekend?
My gosh. Well, this person is, do we know what their pronoun is? Do we know their she pronoun?
I did not write it down.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, this person is already so far along the path. Like, that's a really self-aware way of framing it, because what they know for sure is that hookup culture is not working particularly well for them. And they know that their behavior within hookup culture is driven quite a bit more by fear than love, right? Love, participating in hookup culture from a place of love is like, I can't wait. I love the thrill. I love the not knowing. I really love kind of articulating my needs from beginning to end. I feel wonderful afterwards. Fear is, I feel like I should. I feel like I'm, weird if I don't. I'm afraid if I don't participate, I'm going to be left out. And for this person, and this book club member, what they're saying is, I'm driven to hookup culture from a sense of not enoughness. And that it's a really easy, I get kind of that really easy like dopamine hit of being wanted by somebody, and I know that afterwards I feel pretty empty. And
Right.
so I think there's a lot of dots that this person has already connected. And what I would want to validate first and foremost is the desire to be desired is makes total sense. That is a norm. That is a normal, you know, healthy, adaptive, just kind of human, right? That the thrill of the chase and the pursuit and that kind of sense of like being wanted is so compelling and so engaging. That makes so much sense. And I feel really confident that there are other avenues to have that experience, you know, to kind of play with that, like, is it, you know, will they, won't they, like to kind of play with that in a way that doesn't put them in a spot to feel the way that they know they're going
Yeah.
to feel afterwards.
Yeah.
You're gonna...
Yeah. No, I mean, I think it's so true. And I think that, yeah, I think that it's, you know, the type of thing that we hear. And it's interesting because I did some work seeing couples when I was in grad school, but I don't primarily do couples therapy. And I think, you know, this desire to feel wanted is something that people, it's so prevalent across. And I think that it's, you know, it is so important to be able to recognize, whether it be, you know, in dating or hookup culture or anything else, you know, what is it that's driving this? Because it can be so easy for that reason to be buried under, you know, the actual behaviors.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And the fact that this person's already got that connection, it's a really big part of it, right? They're not kind of like sitting there scratching their heads like, why do I keep doing this? No, they know that there's something about being wanted that is really compelling. And so then, of course, like I want to sit with this person and make a genogram of their family of origin and talk about, you know, early experiences in family of origin. And, you know, was there a sense of whatever, not feeling seen, having to, you know, only feeling seen when they come home with like the A+ on their paper, feeling like they only were seen when their athletic performance was extraordinary. Like, is there a sense of like, I have to be, you know, like really in your face, really performative to feel seen? And
Yeah.
it maybe perhaps, you know, there is an entire, the other thing I'm thinking is there's an entire world of dating and going really slowly and not, you know, kind of taking one's time and going step by step. And I wonder if there are some fears over there of like, oh, okay, yes, I'm saying I hate, you know, hooking up, but maybe I'm a bit more afraid. Maybe for as dreadful as hooking up is sometimes, it's even more frightening to imagine sitting down, stone cold sober, in a
Yeah.
conversation, like kind of slowly dipping in step by step. There may be some vulnerability there that that feels, you know, feels frightening, unfamiliar, new. I think some of it is just sometimes a skill deficit, especially if somebody went to college in a, you know, on a campus where there was a lot of hookup culture and kind of spent some time even after college. You know, it can just be sort of strange to step out of that and step into this like
Yeah.
more adult like way of sitting down over a meal, you know, like sipping wine, going slowly, step by step. It can just be even a skill deficit of something that you just have to kind of get, you know, get
Yeah.
familiar, get some practice with.
And there's actually one question. The next question was one from a college student. Can I slip that one in? I'm mindful of time.
Yes, I love anything from, I love the college students of the
Um,
world.
so this one says, I'm in college and feel like there are a lot of gender roles or expectations around who makes the first move in hookup.
Yeah.
I'm all about owning your sexy, but it's hard when gender stereotypes exist everywhere. How do you suggest I balance empowering myself and making the first move while also being aware of these labels easily assigned to women who make the first move and are too forward?
Right, right. Well, and the label is a woman who makes the first
Right.
move is too
Is,
forward.
yeah.
Yeah. I, of course, want her to know to the marrow of her bones that this is not a her thing, right? Like this is something that was stuck to her, and I hate that for her. And I love that when she stays in her power and when she stays in her agency, she is teaching every man, every young man on campus that this is actually another way of doing it. Like this is possible. And she gives that man the experience of like, oh, it's actually really kind of liberating to be a bit more, you know, following along. And I think actually from what I, you know, the college men that I talk to, there can be a tremendous sense of relief when she is really clear and she is taking the first move, because I think that the vast majority of college men are deeply afraid of coming across as creepy or sketchy, or, you know, like they don't want to get a reputation among their peers of like, you know, of just being just whatever, like looking for, you know, like looking for one thing, da, da, da. So I think there could be, I think the fear is, her fear is I'll be labeled as too forward, but I want her to remember that at least the good men, the men that I would want her to be investing in, are also very, very concerned about coming across too strong for her. So there's a way that by like flipping the script and like switching around that polarity, she's liberating both of them actually at the very, very same time.
Yeah. And I think that's so important. And it's, I don't remember who it was. I think it was someone that you were quoting, and it was a point that I'd never thought of before, but it's so important that we hear statistics about how many women are sexually assaulted or abused, but we never hear about the men who are, you know,
Yeah.
doing perpetrating, and that the statistics are always framed in terms of the women. And that's a little tangential with this, but it, you know, it really struck me, something that I think it's so easy to take for granted. And what your book does gently, right? It's not accusatory toward men. It's not bashing men at all. And you do a great job of calling out that there are wonderful men out there. And, you know, it's not about women versus men and, you know, everyone along the
Right.
binary. But that we live in a society that lives with this narrative about who women are and who they should be, and how we are facing kind of this paradox of women are supposed to be empowered these days more than they used to be, yet we're still, you know, very much in some ways pigeonholed. And that, you know, as hard as it is not to let these societal expectations and standards hold people back, because it's not just women who don't want these, often it's men who don't want these things
Mm-hmm.
as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, that was one of the things, I mean, writing, I think anytime somebody undertakes something as big as writing a book, it's an education for the author as well. And I learned so much, especially in writing Taking Sexy Back, just about how deeply and powerfully and rigidly gender role narratives really shape the whole conversation about sex and sexuality, which is, which is why she wrote in with that question of like, ugh, I feel so stuck. I know how I feel on my insides. I know how I want to feel in a sexual experience. And I also know that I don't want to deal with a bunch of bullshit about how people view me if I am confident and clear in articulating what I want and need. So I hear that. I hear that. But what I love is that she knows, like she has this
Yeah.
center, and I know that she will find a partner or partners who know how to like just create space to hold that and celebrate that and work with that, you know, because that's the stuff of really wonderful sexual experiences, is somebody who can come in with a sense of attunement with their own body and connection with somebody else, you know. So I want her to not dull that, you know, not dull that flame that she's got, for sure.
Yeah. And, you know, for anyone out there, knowing that this is something that you want or you're interested in is a big first step. And I know it often doesn't feel like enough, but, you know, whether it be realizing on the other end of the spectrum, hey, I think I'm feeling depressed. Hey, I think I might be ready to seek therapy. Or, hey, I think this might be something I want to explore. Or, hey, I want to break out of these, you know, stereotype gender roles. Even if something feels frustrating not to be taking the action, that recognition is a huge step. And, you know, a sign of courage and bravery and strength that often gets overlooked because people are so focused on whether you're doing the action and not whether you're at the point of recognizing that you might want there to be a change.
What a like really lovely and effective summary of like a through line of this whole conversation is like, right, this whole conversation has been about attending to and honoring the quiet voices inside of us, you know, like the little whispers, because those are inner, whatever you want to call it, inner knowing or inner flame or, you know, whatever, inner child, like whatever that part of you that just is speaking to you in whispers, that sense of knowing. And I love that your community has brought forward these questions that are like, hey, something's going on inside of me. And I think that we this whole time have been like, yes, that makes sense. That is real. That is valid. Go with that. More of that. I think that's a really nice summary of our conversation tonight.
And, you know, you have your phenomenal podcast, Reimagining Love. You have your other book, Loving Bravely. Are there other avenues that people can follow along with your work or participate in anything that you're doing right now?
Yeah, well, that's, I think, Instagram, since we're on Instagram, my link tree has got, links to all of those, so many resources, right? My website has got, I don't know, well over 100 different articles, and there's 2 e-courses. There's an e-course for couples who are recovering from infidelity, which is a course that I'm really proud of, and it certainly is not for everybody. It's a course that I never want anybody to need, but of course so many couples do need it, where couples are, one or both are kind of considering like what's possible here. It's a lovely support to a journey. The Intimate Relationships 101 e-course is basically my Northwestern Marriage 101 course, which has been the most popular course at Northwestern for years and years and years and years. It's now been turned into this e-course that's available through my website, yeah, and the podcast each week. And that's probably, I think we hit all of the main ones. The books are available wherever books are sold. Of course, we always send people to bookshop.org because they support local indie booksellers. So reimagining, or Loving Bravely and Taking Sexy Back are both available wherever you get your books.
And then last question is, what are you currently reading?
What am I currently reading?
Sorry to put you on the spot there with that one, but
it's so good. I just interviewed him for the podcast. It's called The Good Life. It's Waldinger and Schultz, and this is the new. There's been a couple of them over the years, but this is from Harvard's longest ever happiness study. They have over 80 years of data about happiness, and all of it comes back to relationships, which of course makes me be like, okay, this is my life's work, our life's work. And it's a beautiful book. They just did a magnificent job with it.
Well, thank you so much. You're truly such an inspiration to me, and I know to readers as well. And it has been such a pleasure talking to you and following along with all of your work, and I so appreciate your taking the time to meet with me and answering some of the questions of the book club tonight.
Yeah, so good to meet you, Sarah. I hope that we will keep in touch.
Certainly. Have a good night.
Okay. Bye, everybody. Thank you for being here.